In the last video, we finally got started with our animation. We prepared our scene and made Blender do the heavy lifting by automatically creating keyframes for us using the location and rotation keying set that we specified. We then added the initial keyframes for the beginning motion of the robot arm. In this video, we will pick up right where we left off and finish our animation. We will learn how to make the claw pick up the can by using the child of constraint and adding keyframes to the influence in order to turn it on and off. This will effectively attach and detach it from the claw. At the very end, we'll finish the animation by building a shelf for the can to rest on in its final position. So, we're going to do the same thing with the bone of the can, like we did in part 1, where we constrained it to the wrist and toggled the influence. So let's select the bone of the can and then come over to our constraints. Let's add in a child of constraint. We're going to target the armature, and we're going to select bone wrist as the bone. If when you do this, the can jumps to a different location or seems to disappear, just click Set Inverse and it should pop back into its original position. But now if I scrub through here, you can see that it is a child of that wrist from start to finish and follows it from the start, which is not what we want. We want from frame 1 to 90 to be an influence of 0. So we're just going to drag this down to 0, and then we're going to click this button to add a keyframe. So now when we scrub through, there should be no influence on that child of constraint. Awesome. I'm going to scroll in here a little bit, and then I'm going to come here and click this button to go to the very next frame. And this is the frame where we want the influence here to be fully at 1. So we're going to bring that to 1, and then with our automatic keying on, it makes that keyframe for us automatically. So here it's 0, and here it's 1. So now anything after 91, we have the can of beans being carried by the robot arm because it is parented to the wrist. And we parent it to the wrist because we want to be able to move it when it rotates as well. Okay, I'm going to undo that just to get this back down to our position here. And then I think I'm going to go to, let's go to 120, because what we're going to do is we're going to bring this over here and we're going to put it on a shelf over here somewhere. So I'm just going to drag this over here like this. And I'm going to pull it to about here first, right before this joint and arm snaps straight. So you can see it snaps like that straight. I'm going to do it right before it snaps straight, something like that. Okay, and then I'm going to pull this down here like this. Well, we'll keep it at an angle here for now, and then we can see what we have. Okay, so we have a glitch of some sort here. So you may be confused at what's happening, because I was confused for a second. But the reason this is happening is because we forgot to add some keyframes in the position right before we pick up the can. So I'm going to just take this one, X, and delete keyframes. We're going to go back here to right before we pick up the can. So not every control has a keyframe on frame 90 that tells Blender what its current location and rotation is. So for example, if I click this button to show only the selected, if I click this one, you can see the location of our wrist bone. We don't actually have a keyframe there. So if we add another keyframe over here for a movement, then it's going to calculate it from the last keyframe we have, which is here. These two are when this stops here, but we don't have one on frame 90. So we need to make sure we have a keyframe on everything on frame 90. So let's select everything, and then that should make a keyframe on frame 90 with every control and bone that we select. So just make sure that we don't have influence still here. And I'm going to uncheck this so we can see all of our keyframes. Yep, so that's good. And after frame 91, we should have that be full influence with the can, and we do. Okay, so now we can come over to frame 120 again. And let's move this again and see and make sure that we have this set up the way we want. So something like this and then like this for now. Just a really rough placement for now. And now let's drag. Okay, so yes. So now we start here. It's only calculating it from frame 90 now. So frame 90, we have everything set, and now we're lifting up the can and putting it over here. Okay, so now let's evaluate what we have. So let's just play it and see. First of all, that's a little too fast. So I'm going to take this last one only, and we're going to click and drag this to frame, let's try 140. I just want to see what that looks like. Okay, I like that speed. That's good. I'm going to save it. And then if we look at it from the front here, you can see the can, when it picks it up, you can see it's going through the floor. You can see that in side view here as well. So let's go to here, right where it's at the lowest point of the floor, and we're just going to rotate this up. We want this to be rotated up anyway because we want it to be picking up the can of beans without spilling them. Don't spill the beans, even though it does have a lid on it. But this way it keeps it even. So it picks it up, and it's not tilting it at all. And then when we get here, now it's kind of tilting it, but that's okay because we want it to tilt so it clears the shelf that we'll add later. Awesome, so let's just see that in real time. Perfect, okay. So now I'm going to go to frame 150 because I'm just going to pull this out just a little bit more right before I pull that extender piston out. So let's just see what this looks like. Okay, and the reason I'm doing it like this is because I don't want that snapping. So if I don't ease into that, you know, sometimes this joint will just snap and it just doesn't look very natural. So I just want to make sure that it eases into being straight like that. And then I'm going to take this last one, Shift D to duplicate that out. We're going to duplicate that out so that it hangs another 10 frames before we start pulling this out. And then from here to here, let's go to 170. We're going to pull this out just straight up like that. And it doesn't have to be perfect, just something like that. So now that's a little bit too fast. So we're going to take this one, drag that to maybe 190. Yeah. And then we're going to duplicate that one to hang for 10 frames on that, or maybe even 20 frames. Nah, let's do 10 frames. And then from here, I'm just going to we'll go to 220 now. And then what this is going to do is we're going to rotate this down. Let's go into front mode so we can get that right. And I'm going to pull this down a little bit too. The reason I'm pulling it down is because when we lifted it up, we wanted to go higher than the shelf, but then we want to lower it down onto the shelf. And the reason we're adding the shelf later is because it's going to be easier to add it later, where we can place it where we know the can is going to be at the final resting position. So let's see what we have there. We have something that looks like this. Okay, so this is starting to rotate because I didn't add my rotation keyframe. So I don't want this to start rotating right here. And if I'm going to guess, the last keyframe where this is set before the last one is going to be 150. So let's just select this one and go to selected only. Oh, it's actually 140. So yeah, so it's actually calculating from here to here. So it's going to start that rotation right here, and it's going to start slowly rotating all the way until it comes to here. And I don't want that. So I actually want to take this one and Shift D to duplicate that. We're going to duplicate that out, and then I'm going to uncheck this to see where I want that to actually start rotating. So we clear it, and then, yeah, actually right about where it is right now. So where is that? Right there on 190. Yeah, okay. So then we will just take this one and pull it to 190. So let's see what that looks like. Yes. Okay, perfect. Except for the rotation is a little bit too far. Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe that is straight. I feel like that's a little bit crooked. Let's just pull this up. I'm going to hit Shift and hold that to make sure that's... Oh, wait, I don't want to do that there. Let's just undo that. We got to make sure we're on 220, and then we're going to overwrite that. Yeah. So something like this. So that looks flat enough, I think, there. So let's look at our entire animation so far. We have it reaching out, clamping down, moving and pulling this over here, and putting it down on the shelf. Awesome. Okay, I did see something that I don't quite like. So when it comes over here, between here and here, it's a little bit too close inwards like this. So about right here, let's go into top mode. I'm just going to pull this out a little bit so that it's swinging at a greater angle there. So let's now see what that looks like. Oh yeah, that looks a lot more smooth because it's not like folding into itself then. Let's see that again from a different angle. Yes, perfect. All right, I'm liking what I see. I'm liking what I see, which means we need to save it. So now we need to make the robot arm let go of the can of beans. So let's select this one. We're going to have to figure out where it wants to let go. The first thing I'm going to do is we're going to, on 220, we're going to set a keyframe for this position here of the claw control. So I to set that keyframe, and we can even come back here to make sure that's set. And then how long did it take down here for the claw to open and close? It was from 60 to 80, so it took 20 frames. So I want to do the same thing. So I want it to open in 20 frames. So this is going to be from here to here, so 220 to 240, and then we'll just grab this and we'll pull that open all of the way. Okay, so now we have this. Oh, but let's see, we have it set it down, and remember, we want it to pause for, let's try 10 frames, and then we have to drag this out 10 frames as well. So pauses, opens, and then we'll have this move down into resting position. Good. So now we want this influence of the can bone to be at 0. So we have to make sure on frame 250 that we have an influence of 1 still, because on the very next frame we're going to have influence of 0. But if I start dragging this down to 0, you can see then it goes back into its original position, because it's like, oh, well, there's no influence anymore. That means nothing has happened because I'm back where I started. So before we drag this to 0, we actually need to apply the visual transform here. This is exactly what we did in part 1 of the series. So just make sure that's the only bone selected. Come here to pose. We want to apply and then apply visual transform to pose. And it disappears, but not really. If we remember, it brings that all the way up here, which we can then keyframe. Now this is going to be really important. Because we have automatic keying on, we either need to turn it off temporarily before we change the influence, or a better way is we can just hover our mouse over, press I to set a keyframe right now. Because we need to make sure that these are set before we change our influence. Otherwise, it's going to mess up and the robot arm is going to start glitching out, or the constraint, it's just going to get confused and not know what it's supposed to be doing. So now we can come back to our bone constraint and drag this down, which will set that automatic keyframe for us. So now we have an influence of 1 here. But what we didn't do here is we didn't set a keyframe here. So let's do that again. I'm just going to select this one here. We're going to delete that altogether. So we're back down to here. Now on this one, we have to set a keyframe. You can see this green here. That means a keyframe is not set yet. So let's I to set a keyframe there. And then we come here to our influence and make sure there's a keyframe there, which there is. I think we set that already, but I'm going to uncheck that and then check that again just to make sure. Now we can go to 251, apply our visual transform to pose. And remember, we don't have a keyframe here yet, so I to put that keyframe. And now we've dragged this down to 0, which will automatically add a keyframe for us. It has to be done in this order, and so now we have full influence and no influence. So full influence, well, it is still being carried, but once it lets go, there's no more influence. So now when we start to drag this away, the can stays put where we set it down. Okay, now we're going to go back into our resting position, or at least our starting position, not our resting position. So I'm going to take the start keyframe, Shift D to duplicate that all the way back here. And how long do I want that? I want it to be 250, 260, 270. We'll do 280. So we'll bring this to 280. And you can see we've got a problem. Actually 2, because I didn't want to start here like this at the very beginning. I wanted it actually to start in the middle because it looks cooler that way. And in the middle, I mean having the arm straight along this y-axis. So I'm just going to delete this one here for now. We're going to go back to the beginning. And if I hover my mouse over here, press 0, it'll center the timeline cursor to whatever that is. And I'm going to take this keyframe here, and we're just going to adjust this a little bit. I'm just going to take this, not that one, this one, and just make this straight here. And that replaces everything on frame 1 to this position here, because I want it to start in this position. And I also want this to be closed a little bit more. Not fully, but it's going to start closed like that. And then everything should be fine, should be the same, because it's going to open up into the same positions. We just need to make sure nothing is clipping through the floor with our new setup here, which it doesn't look like it is. All right, perfect. So now let's go back to, what did we say, 280? Let's just type in 280 here. I'm going to take this one and Shift D to duplicate that, and we're going to put that on 280. Good. Okay, and then the second problem is this is back down where it started on our end frame, because that's exactly the same as our start frame. But that glitches out because then Blender's like, oh, I thought you wanted it to stay here. Okay, well, I guess you want it back here. Okay, well, I'm trying to do both of them at the same time. But this is a really easy fix, so all we have to do is select this bone, check only show selected, so we're only showing the keyframes for this bone. Actually, before we do that, let's just come back out here. Let's click anywhere to make sure nothing is selected here. And now we check this, select this one, X to delete, and delete that keyframe. Okay, now that one doesn't have this keyframe only for this bone, but everything else, if we uncheck this, still has a keyframe there. So now we should be good to go. So let's see what we have from start to finish here. Yes, picks it up, extends it out, puts it down on the shelf, and oh, we have a little bit of a glitch. So let's see what's going on here. Yes. It's the classic thing that I keep doing. Let's once again, I'm just going to get rid of this keyframe. We're going to have to do this over again. On frame 250, I'm going to select everything and make sure everything has a keyframe. That's what I should have done immediately when I got to frame 250 in the first place, but I didn't. So again, lesson learned. And this will happen to you time and time again. You'll be like, what did I do? And so that's why I'm showing you the full process, even my mistakes here, because it's going to help you to diagnose problems that you run into and how to solve them. So once again, grab just the first one, Shift D to duplicate this. We're going to scroll in and put that on frame 280. Make sure that is on 280. Yes. Okay. Again, just make sure nothing is selected down here. Make sure this bone is the only one selected. Check only show selected. Select this one, X, and delete. Okay, so now hopefully we've got it right. Let's uncheck that now. Go back to the beginning and press play. And it clamps down, picks it up, puts it over here, extends it out, sets it down, releases it, and yes. And then we want it to cycle through, so let's end this just on 290. We'll just say it, we're going to end at 290. And then if we just press play, it will continue to cycle through that animation. And then I'm going to also save it. Let's disable our overlays and see our animation. Awesome. Then we can view it from different angles. Sets it down. Nice. So yeah, it's a bit of work with the constraint, but with the robot arm and moving it and manipulating it, it's actually really easy, a lot easier than moving it piece by piece. So creating the rig has really helped us, and it will help us if we have any other animation that we want to use it for. So we can add on to this animation, or we can change it, or we can move it and manipulate it in different ways, because we've done all of the hard work prior in the setup and the rigging and everything. And that's generally how it goes in animation. If you have a good rig and a good setup, then it's so much easier for the animator to animate quickly in the way they need to. But we need to add our shelf here. So let's go to the end here and go into object mode. Let's select our can, Shift S and cursor to selected, because we're going to add the shelf right here. So I'm going to add mesh and plane right there. Let's press S to scale and Y to constrain it on the Y-axis. We're going to just scale that there. So just a little shelf like this. You can make it as long or as short as you want. This is good here for me, but let's go into front mode. I'm going to bring this, let's grab this on the X-axis and pull that back here so it's just right there. I'm also going to tab into edit mode, make sure that face select mode is checked here, and then press A to make sure everything is selected, and then E to extrude, and we're just going to extrude that down just a little bit, just to make it look like a little bit of a shelf with some thickness there. Okay, let's see what that looks like without our overlays there. You can also add a floor here and stuff to make it look even better, but we're running out of time for that. So this, I think, is good enough to demonstrate what you can do with the rig that we created. Feel free to create your own animations, play around with this, play around with the keyframes, get used to them, and just see what kind of things that you can do. This is where you can be creative and you can experiment. So go ahead and do that. Make your own animation. Move the robot arm in the way that you see fit, and then in the next video, I will show you how to render out your animation really quickly into a video so that you can share it with all of your friends and family. So when you're ready, head on over to the next one.